I remember coming home from school one day as an 11-year-old boy and feeling unbearable back pain. I told my mother I wanted to lie down for a bit, and ended up drifting off to sleep for about 20 to 30 minutes. I woke up shortly thereafter with an overwhelming urge to pee. Half awake, I waddled to the bathroom and dropped trough, exposing my mighty 3 inches to the open air. The fluid came bursting out of me like a river pushing through a broken dam, which was odd considering I hadn't drank much during the school day. Then I looked down and realized why I was peeing so fervently. It wasn't pee at all. Deep, dark red blood was pouring out of my little bit member into the toilet, and to my surprise, I wasn't all that mortified. I then finished up the most satisfying release I had ever felt and called my mom to Crapper, where she witnessed the carnage. She was hysterical, as one could imagine. We called my doctor and asked her for advice. She said that as long as I wasn't in pain or feeling faint, I should just rest and take the next day off school to come see her. She also asked us to collect a sample if it were possible, and sure enough, my next pee was just as blood-filled, so I was easily able to fulfill that request. As it turned out, I was in the incredibly rare position of being an 11-year-old with kidney stones, and they had torn open my kidney, which eventually healed on its own. As for the stones themselves, the doctors couldn't find them using standard imaging equipment, ultrasound, X-ray, so they decided it was best to schedule a ureteroscopy. So several weeks later, there I was, a 5th grader, lying naked on a table with my 3-inch penis exposed, telling my priest about how I had just had a camera shoved into my pee hole the previous week. But kidding aside, the pain I felt from having a copper wire in my member was immense. While I was unconscious for the procedure itself, having to pee afterward was excruciating, as the wire itself leaves a trail of tearing and welts as it's inserted and removed. And urine is not known to be the most forgiving of substances to open wounds. I actually had to hold my mom's hand while I peed, and being that I was a huge kid, taller than she was by then, I nearly broke her fingers. I've always had pretty bad cystic acne all over the place. So when my butt crack started to hurt a little and itch like crazy, I thought nothing of it. Oh, there's another zit, it'll burst like all the others and I'll be done with it. And burst it did. It was a good one too, lots of blood and pus. The problem is, the blood and pus didn't go away as quickly as my other zits. But it'll go away, right? I just need to stop the blood from getting everywhere every day. Ah, these folded up tissues will work perfectly. And they did for the next year or so that I let it go. The tissues mostly stayed in place, held by my ass crevice and by the goo that was constantly oozing out. For a while I still thought it might just be another acne cyst, but I thought that maybe the location kept it from healing. But as time went on I finally felt it was something else. So finally, after about a year, I admitted that I had some sort of issue on my lower back to my parents. Took me to a doctor who examined it and told me it was indeed a pilonidal cyst. He sliced it out of me, said there was a ton of hair that had grown into it, and patched me up. Weeks or months went by and this thing opened back up again. It apparently didn't want to heal on its own. I had to then go to another doctor who would pack it full of some sort of bandage that I believe was made from seaweed. It finally worked and stayed closed, but for years I didn't trust it, expecting it to open back up again. Come to find out, my mother had the same cyst when she was younger. So I'm assuming it might be somewhat hereditary, but who knows? The whole thing really took a toll on my mental health. While I was just trying to ignore it, I was always worrying that the wad of disgusting tissues would fall out, or that the blood would seep out and be visible on my clothing. And when it opened back up again I thought I'd be dealing with it all my life. And mentally I kinda have. I felt like I knew what a woman went through on her period. Problem is, they usually get some sort of education about menstruation. I didn't know what the hell was going on with me. Sure, I should have gone to a doctor when it first started, but as a dumb it'll go away kid, I didn't. I was born with an extra hole in my butt and a very long coccyx which now feels like the beginning of a tail. What's even weirder is that I thought everyone's coccyx was that long. My girlfriend is a doctor, don't ask how she saw it, but when she did she freaked out. After some research diagnosed it. Got dry socket after my wisdom teeth removal, turned into a nasty infection. My breath smelled like dead things. Also, look up penile adhesion and/or skin bridges. Getting that taken care of, finally, at age 25, next Thursday actually. And the worst was roundworms, like the kind your dog gets. Nothing like looking down in the toilet and seeing creepy crawlies wriggling about your stool. I had an infected ingrown toenail on both my big toes for several years. It just wouldn't heal. The doctor would use this machine to burn, Cauterize, the dead skin. Pus, dried blood all around my big toes. That wasn't the worst part though. He had to deaden my big toes before he started the cauterizing procedure, and he chose to inject the needle right through the front of my big toes. Holy hell, that hurt so much. It finally cleared up when I just stayed home for a few days and didn't walk around much. I hit my finger with a car door and eventually my doctor had to poke a hole in my nail to let the blood drain out, because it was causing a lot of pressure and pain. I ended up losing the nail on my middle finger, but it grew back fine. As long as the nail matrix, part of the nail slightly behind and underneath the cuticle, isn't damaged, the keratinization process isn't hindered and the nail grows fine. The nail bed, on the other hand, is pretty much a vacuum. The nail is attached to the bed, but only the top layers that are keratinized grow forward, so the blood and lymph or anything else under there is most likely going to stay put. That's what I learned after 1800 hours of COS school 4 years ago, anyway. In other news, I had a sebaceous cyst removed from my leg. It was a bump about the size of a dime on the surface, but when they pulled it out it was the size of a small grape. My eustachian tubes are deformed, more specifically they're fused shut. So, my ears cannot drain ear wax or water on their own. My hearing is severely affected by this and I'm legally deaf in my left ear from ear infections that were so bad it ruined my hearing. In order to avoid serious ear infections I have to regularly see an ear, nose and throat specialist who manually roto-roots out my ears. I've had dark green to jet black gunk come out, smelled like death. I've also had cerumen, earwax, that was so compacted in my ear that it came out in the shape of my inner ear. When I was about 15 I thought it was hilarious that I was bleeding out of my butt and had explosive diarrhea. Turns out I have ulcerative colitis. As well as esophagitis. They even put in I have stomach problems too. Kidneys and liver are good though. I have a colonoscopy and endoscopy at least once a year just to check if I have any new tears, inflammation, polyps, ulcers, or heck even just plain old cancer. It's a maintainable disease with medicine and attention. I'm not as bad as some other horror stories I've heard. People get a colectomy and now poop out of a bag. But I'm worried cause the meds, with the wrong insurance, is steep. The meds with no insurance is steep. Sometimes I go a week without taking one dump and then when it does happen, it's the angriest dung heap that got fed up with the ghetto that is my rectum and evicted its own messy self as fast as it possibly could. That is my disgusting lifestyle. Enjoy. When I was younger, about 12, I had some disgusting stuff going on with my little toe. It was a cauliflower wart and it looked freaking disgusting. Being my disgusting 12-year-old self, I used to pick at it and I made it a lot worse. Eventually, it grew so big that it covered all of my little toe. Finally, at the hospital I got it removed. After that though, I started to fear swimming pools, because that's where I obtained it in the first place. One day when I was young, I noticed a few red spots on my penis. This was kinda strange, but it wasn't that weird, so I just let it go. The next day I awoke to something horrible. My penis had quadrupled in size. Now you're probably thinking, that sounds awesome. Wrong. It did not grow in a good way at all. Only the area just below the head grew, so it looked like a mushroom with a lump on top. Not only that, but it was covered in some kind of dried up pus, and the whole thing itched. I had to miss a week of summer camp because I couldn't stand up with the thing. It was too heavy for the rest of the UN enlarged shaft to hold comfortably. I don't think it was going to rip off or anything, but I definitely couldn't walk around with it. I've got a large amount of scabs on my back. Not big mind you, just like the size of acne. They aren't really annoying or anything, but the problem is that if I slide around in bed or run my hands down my back, it rips off the scabs. Like 2 or 3 at a time. And the bleed. Dear God, to do the bleed. I can't wear white shirts without undershirts, and most of the time I can only wear those once or twice as they'll be covered in bloody spots more often than not. I also have loads of bloody sticky boogers. Not like nosebleeds, but just boogers that are covered in blood. In the morning I often spend about 10 minutes pulling them out of my nose and snorting them out of the shower, because they are more often than not massive. Just big, sticky, blood boogers. It used to only happen once in a while, but for the past couple of years I'll wake up with my nose clogged with these big honking boogers. I usually just blow them out of my nose onto my hand, but more often than not they leave a decent spattering of blood. If you squeeze them they exude blood, like it leaks out of them, and a bit of snot, but more blood than snot. They feel kind of like calamari, and taste a bit like ground beef with a funny texture. Pretty chewy. I had a 1-2 combo of nasty medical issues last month. It was a Monday and I had the absolute worst ingrown hair on my leg that I've ever had. By the end of the day, it was affecting the way I walked because it hurt so bad. I figured, being an ingrown hair, it would go away in a few days, so I didn't think it was a big deal. The following day, I left on a trip to Iceland for a week. The second to last day we were there, the next Monday, I could barely walk. The thing I thought was an ingrown hair had blown up to the point that it felt like I had a tennis ball under my skin. At one point, I poked it and it absolutely exploded. Pus, blood, and identifiable liquid came pouring out of it, probably enough to fill a double shot glass. It provided some relief, but overall it wasn't getting any better. When our plane landed the next day, we got our luggage, got in the car, and headed straight to the emergency room. The doctor identified it as a staph infection. He injected me with a local anesthetic, which didn't work as the abscess created by the infection prevents it from penetrating, and then cut it open, drained the remaining gunk, and then took surgical scissors and cut and jabbed out all the infected tissue. I felt every bit of it and it was the absolute worst physical pain I have ever experienced. He then gave me some really strong antibiotics and sent me home. Fast forward a couple weeks and my leg is healing just fine, but I discover a new issue. To be blunt, my penis itched. This was no normal itch. It was the itch of Satan. I waited a couple days and the redness was spreading all over, so naturally, I freaked out and went to the doctor. The doctor informed me that I had a male yeast infection. Apparently it's rare for guys in general but is somewhat common for men that have been on a lot of very strong antibiotics. She prescribed me some pills and I had to go to the store and actually get the cream that women use when they have yeast infections. To this day, there is a tube with the words vaginal cream under my sink. The next 10 days were excruciating. I would wake up in the middle of the night and the itching would be so intense I would get up, run a towel under hot water, and just wrap it around my junk. The most incredible relief I have ever felt in my life. Thankfully it faded a few weeks ago and I'm back to normal. It was a rough month and a half. Not me, but a childhood friend. He was way too open about it. And he was like 10 or so. I would love to forget this one. His penis would itch, like way too much. So his mother took him to the doctor. They cut it open down the shaft, and removed some sort of white stuff. Not what you think it is. It was a buildup of something that caused the unwanted effects. He had to put cream on it daily. What the hell? I developed a nasty staph infection, and it managed to form an abscess on my lower torso. It wasn't getting better, and I started to get a fever, so I went to the emergency room. The doc took one look at it. It was red, swollen, with a dark center. It looked quite disturbing, and he said it had to be cut right then and there. I didn't get to see the cut, but my husband did. Apparently blood and pus just poured out. It was so deep they still didn't get it all, so I had to have emergency surgery. I spent the next month packing and unpacking an open wound. Whenever I would have to pull the packing out, they would be covered in blood and nastiness. It was not a pleasant experience,